You are listening to the e-flux podcast.
Welcome back to the e-flux podcast. In this week's episode, Elvia Wilk talks to artist Agnieszka Kurant and researcher Tobias Rees about their overlapping interests and their collaboration in an AI working group. The second part of the conversation will be published in the next episode of the e-flux podcast.
I'm Elvia Wilk, a contributing editor at e-flux Journal, and I'm here with Agnieszka Kurant and Tobias Rees. Agnieszka Kurant is an artist living in New York who describes her work as investigating the economy of the invisible, in which immaterial and imaginary entities, fictions, phantoms, energy flows, and emergent processes influence political, economic, and ecological systems. She's the recipient of the 2018 Pollitt-Krasner Foundation Award. Congratulations. She's a fellow at the Berggruen Institute, a fellow at the Smithsonian, and an artist in residence at MIT's Center for Art, Science, and Technology. She's done commissions for the Guggenheim in New York and Bilbao and SF MoMA, and she's had a major solo show at the Sculpture Center, exhibited at Palais de Tokyo, the Tate Modern, the Moderna Museet, and so forth. Tobias Rees is the Reid Hoffman Professor of Humanities at the New School. He's also director of the Berggruen Institute based in Los Angeles, which is a nonprofit research institute. He's a fellow at the Canadian Institute for Advanced Research. He has a background in anthropology and was previously an anthropology professor at McGill University. And most recently, in 2018, he published the book After Ethnos, which is an attempt to rethink anthropology without its foundational project of ethnographic fieldwork at its core, and what a rethinking of ethnography might mean for a questioning of the very idea of ethnos and the human. So, Tobias, how did you meet Agnieszka, and how did you figure out that she would be a person to involve in this project?
I take one step back and briefly explain the key idea of the work I'm doing at the Berggruen Institute, which grounds in the observation or recognition that the modern concept of the human, I don't think there was such a concept before modernity. I think it's the key concept of modernity, if you will, grounded in two differentiations. On the one hand, humans were said to be more than mere nature. There's more than animals or plants. And they were also said to be more or other than mere machines. Two differentiations, more and other. And what's interesting about today is that both differentiations seem to fail. Neither in the age of microbiome research or in the age of animal intelligence research are humans more than mere nature, nor do they seem to be more than mere machine, although what a machine exactly is unclear in the age of artificial intelligence. So it's as if, mildly put, the boundaries of the human are reconfigured by fields that are not concerned with the human, or more provocatively put, both differentiations fail us, and the scaffold that gave us the form human collapsed, and who and what we are, if we are anything in the world, in relation to other things in the world, is an open question. So in the context of having conversations about this topic with the curator at the Guggenheim Museum of Fine Arts in San Francisco, Claudia Schmuckli, Claudia said, "You have to meet Agnieszka. It's exactly what she's doing. It's this focus on AI, but also on biology, and it's about the human and how things run diagonal to the human and cut it apart." And so she introduced me to Agnieszka. We met and haven't stopped talking ever since.
When was that?
That was probably in early summer 2018.
And Agnieszka, you've mentioned to me that AI is not the only thing you're doing, and it's not confined in this disciplinary way that it often is, for instance, in scientific research. Could you talk about what you were working on around that time that was involving ideas of artificial intelligence and this idea of artificial intelligence, which I believe was sort of one of the first ways that I came across your work in artificial intelligence?
So I have been working around the questions of collective intelligence and emergence. These are properties of complex systems, which we can observe in both nature and culture. And these are phenomena based on self-organization that appear in systems such as the human brain. We're talking about consciousness as an emergent property. They appear in colonies of bacteria or slime mold or termite colonies that are based on collective decision-making or on collective personality. So entomologists, for example, observe that termite colonies develop complex collective personality traits, and they can be considered as collective persons. Collective intelligence can also be observed in platforms such as the internet or in cities and in urbanism and the stock exchange. So any kind of complex system that involves multiplicity of agents in which nonlinear reactions, nonlinear relationships, and phenomena emerge got me interested in these questions. And I was in particular interested in the relationship between emergence and collective intelligence to producing artworks. And when we think about human culture, it's based on a collective work of what philosophers would call general intellect, or what scientists call collective intelligence, which is the labor of the multitude of various agents, of generations, of people who contributed to our culture. So we can, for example, think about the earliest monuments of human culture, such as the Bible or the mythologies, as works with multiple authors or with unknown authors. And obviously, in the course of development of human civilizations, at some point there emerged the notion of the author. But in my opinion, the question of individual authorship is something that was constructed over time because it allowed for an easier extraction of value and surplus value. And originally there were multiple authors, or multitudes of authors. And now observing the current phenomena such as the internet memes that circulate and evolve like viruses at like unprecedented rate and scale, we realize that this idea of a collective intelligence in culture has always been present, and it still comes back now. But yet, although it's been fully recognized that there is a collective intelligence of knowledge production, because, for example, Wikipedia is a platform where knowledge is produced collectively, although hierarchically, but still it's a collectivity. But in the realm of culture, this idea of like individual author is still something like a paradigm that needs to be exceeded. So I got really drawn to the questions of how we're witnessing paradigm shifts in social sciences and in science in general about the notion of the human, because Western culture assumes, for example, intelligence as something to be individual and located in the human brain. And so the idea of AI has always been anthropomorphized. And in reality, when we think about like how culture or how knowledge is produced in societies, these are collective processes and emergent processes that are unplanned and nonlinear, and sometimes they go through certain like jumps or spikes. And what interested me is that we can think about collective intelligence also in relationship to AI, and that potentially instead of like an individual intelligence, what will be some kind of general intelligence or super intelligence. If it's going to be anything, it's going to be some kind of complex system of emergent system of multiple, maybe only computers, but maybe a connection between computers and other organisms. So I started to be interested in non-human intelligence of various kinds. So for me, my work is situated around the between these questions of artificial intelligence and other types of non-human intelligence, like microbial or animal. And one of the most exciting things for me was the fact that we're living in the world where a lot of things seem to be computable with algorithms. And it's both a good news and a bad news, because in fact, whatever can be computed is immediately also controllable. So the very fact that actually we realize that For example, collective decision-making or other processes in society are based on micro-decisions, and the aggregate results are different from the individual intent. And so these processes are nonlinear, and they actually cannot be computed, which we witnessed for the past couple of years with many collective decisions of societies during elections that were still big surprises, despite polling, despite all the algorithms used to anticipate these decisions. So for me, there are more questions and ways of undermining where AI is today, and supplementing it and finding other elements of the world that can complement the AI, such as animal and microbial intelligence, is actually very humbling, and especially because we are now capable of calculating very precisely the aggregated value of social capital. And a lot of platforms and corporations have used algorithms for capturing our data and selling them to advertising corporations, and then forecasting on our behaviors, moods, movements, and habits. So there is this fear that now everything can be controlled. Yet I do believe that there are a lot of signs that there are also a lot of nonlinear processes in both nature and culture that are uncomputable.
Yeah, so picking up on the idea of collective intelligence, I'm curious how that translates to the actual structure of this AI working group. So the idea that knowledge is emergent and that there are various actors with different kinds of agency collaborating to produce knowledge specifically about AI is also really interesting. So Tobias, how did you organize this working group? How do you imagine the collective project and the different kind of actors and agents, human and non-human, who you are bringing together as a node?
You mean the Berggruen AI and Human Working Group?
Exactly, yeah.
The idea of the working group was exquisitely simple, and the project was to build an extended notion of AI that involves not only engineers, but also philosophers and artists. So when you ask most people, what is AI? They will say AI is what engineers do. It's an engineering field. But to some degree, that's an insufficient conception of AI, an unfortunate one too, because you can easily show that the modern concept of the human as more or other than mere machine grounds on a whole set of taken for granted distinctions. So, for example, we take it for granted that there is a difference between natural things and artificial things, things that exist all by themselves and things that are human-made. Likewise, we take it for granted that there is a distinction between non-living things, sentient things that can, at the very least, have perception, feeling, are at home in the world, reproduce, and non-living things like a table or a cup or a machine. And most of us will take it for granted that non-living things, artificial things, cannot reason, think, see, feel, learn. So if AI engineering would be true, if it would live up to its potential, it would cut across distinctions that we all take in everyday life simply for granted. So there are real philosophical stakes to AI. In fact, the whole modern conception of the human on the one side and nature and machines on the other side, which also organizes, for example, how we divide universities into faculties of arts concerned with one thing, the human, and faculties of science and engineering concerned with everything else insofar as it's reducible to math and mechanics, would actually collapse. This would be pretty dramatic. In some way, 2,500 years of European thinking would be called into question. So the goal was to say artificial intelligence is a kind of philosophical laboratory in which who and what we are as humans is reinvestigated, maybe reconfigured, maybe dramatically changed, and not just what we as humans are, but what the status of human-made things is in the world, and what the place or the role of the human in the world vis-a-vis other things like machines or animals is. So the goal of the working group was to bring philosophers first, who can show to AI engineers the history of concepts like natural, artificial intelligence, human, machine, to bring artists who investigate in an almost philosophical way the shifting boundaries of the human, vis-a-vis machines. And that could mean that what a machine is changes in our understanding what it is. And we bring engineers because the question how AI is changing the human is not an abstract question. It's actually a question that plays out in the very concrete things that engineers do on a daily basis. And so originally that was the plan: bring all of these people together, have conversations, and eventually played out around three questions. What is intelligence? Are there general concepts of intelligence? If one tries to think intelligence independent of humans and speak about non-human intelligences, can we come up with a map of intelligences? And then what is the world of AI? That's almost a biological question. How is AI at home in the world? Is there a sensorial input? How are humans at home in the world? How are animals at home in the world? Does AI have an ecological niche? How does it participate in the biogeochemical cycles and things like that? And the third thing then is, what are values that we want AI to know, to learn? What are criteria of values, especially when these values do not only coalesce around the human, but around the world, of which humans and machines are part, but also microbes and animals and plants, etc. So this is the broad field that we have staked out for ourselves, and we are operating in this right now.
I'd like to ask both of you about the anxieties behind questioning the human, of which there are many. Specifically, this idea that, or the fear that destabilizing the idea of the human as a universal, historically constant entity will rupture the foundation of humanism, the humanities, and humanitarianism, by which humans are defined as subjects as opposed to objects. Where does the fear come from, and how does that become addressed in the interdisciplinary project of bringing different people together? And then Agnieszka, I'd like to ask how it plays into your work through some of your projects in specific.
I think it's important to recall that what we call the human, this thing that we supposedly all have in common, whether we're a man or a woman, or something in between, or else, if you're young or old, rich or poor, black or white, something that is truly universal, such a concept of the human that is time and place independent, generic, at least in its aspirations universal, did not always exist. So historically, it's a very recent thing, right? It was, at least in Europe, not existing before the 17th century. And my reading adventures have convinced me that it has simply, it has not existed in Asia, for example, before either. So it's not, So to recognize that means to understand that someone had to have the idea of inventing something like a general concept of the human. It means that someone had to probably write a book about it. Someone else had to disagree with it. Maybe there were people who were completely against it and opposed to it. So it became a kind of a struggle and a fight, an argument. And roughly, the story is that this played out in Europe between the 1630s and the 1890s, more or less. And what's interesting is that this concept of the human was at the very beginning in the 1630s by people like Hobbes or Descartes understood as a project. They knew that they invent something novel, something that did not exist before. They did not think that they articulate necessarily universal, but that it's a project. But already in the early 18th century, the human was taken for granted. It was refined, it was re-articulated, but it was assumed that finally we figured it out. And so when you look at how people like Descartes or David Hume or Diderot or Kant, all white men, designed the human, then it's precisely these two distinctions, that humans are more than mere nature and that humans are other than mere machines. And since the 1770s, humans are often described as cultural beings. It's an idea that doesn't exist at all before. And the assumption is that humans were kind of, animal-like parts of nature, and at one point they popped through, and there was this separate realm, an exclusively human realm set apart, the sphere of culture or civilization, an accumulative realm that progresses over time. So anthropologists began to locate people at, different places in our past and so on. So if we now fast forward to late 2018, then we can say, Well, from today's perspective, the aspiration of a universal concept of the human is great. We don't want to let go of that. But the way in which it was articulated really fails us pretty badly. So the first thing that you can notice is that taking the human out of a natural context was pretty bad for the natural context. That in itself is a very complicated statement, because if you put it like this, it sounds as if all you have to do is put the human back into the natural context. But actually, this idea of nature as out there is precisely a concept that was invented to stabilize the human. So a simple post-humanist move where nature is good and human is bad is really insufficient. And that's where AI and biotech biology become so interesting for me. These are instances where the contours of the human, or what the human is actually reinvestigated, for example, with the microbiome, when most of the neurotransmitters in our brain are made by bacteria living in our guts. And I cannot say where Elvia ends and her microbiome begins, and you're literally a descendant of microbes, then you are integrated and involved in the world to an enormous degree, and the assumption that there is something like the human as such, as set apart, becomes almost absurd, because from a microbiome perspective, something like that doesn't exist. If I now go to Agnieszka's collective intelligences, then intelligence, precisely because neurotransmitters are made by bacteria, really becomes a human microbial sort of joint effort, and the human as a separate sphere dissolves. Now, one big challenge is, how can one maintain the goal in that context of a universal concept of the human, at least in its aspirations? But for me, that's not a threat at all. That's exciting and thrilling. It's a project where people can come together, people from very different backgrounds, and actually try to articulate their project. And I don't think there is a one-size-fits-all answer to these questions, because the way in which AI challenges the concept of the human and transforms it and mutates it, and the way in which microbiome does it or climate change does it, are very different. So there is no Latourian ANT one-size-fits-all answer. There are many different kinds of answers, and building up a productive tension between these is actually a very, very exciting project. So for me, it's not a fearful project.
Right. I think that addressing that anxiety and turning it into something extremely productive is exactly what a lot of Agnieszka's work does, especially regarding this idea of the mere human or mere nature, and how mere could be elevated to something else or altered.
We imagine humans as individual entities, and it turns out that it's actually a fiction and abstraction, because, for example, the microbiome that we have in our guts can have a significant impact on the decisions that we take or on our mental states. And when you think on a macro level, the very complex reactions that happen in societies, they are more than the sum of their parts. They are emergent phenomena that are actually sometimes not possible to capture with algorithms. So what interested me in particular is that we're actually living in these times of hybridization, of situations where we are in between this old understanding of what a human was proposed in the 18th century, and we're slowly starting to understand what it's going to mean in the future. And it's reflected in various hybrid areas of our public life, of our experience. So, for example, I've been really interested in the paradigm shifts that happen in the human understanding of nature. So with the new colonization of nature, there are certain virtual heterotopias that emerge. And one of them is this extraterritorial phenomenon of what scientists refer to as animal internet, which is based on the fact that about 50,000 animals around the globe are now tagged with chips, and they can be tracked on animal tracker devices, and scientists are able to follow migrations of whales, birds, or wolves, and they can actually compare them with how different phenomena happen on Earth, such as earthquakes or tsunamis, and how these animals actually can be informing us about this upcoming phenomena better than our digital algorithmic analysis of what happens around the globe. And I think that this is really interesting, that we're inhabiting this place in between AI and studies of microbial or animal intelligence. And at the same time, we're witnessing other hybrid processes. And for example, like the development of the new working class around platforms such as Amazon Mechanical Turk, where algorithms are used to create outsourcing of labor to millions of people around the globe. And this piecemeal work actually resolves problems that humans are able to do, but computers are still unable to do. And humans become kind of cogs in the machine of an algorithm that provides solutions very fast and very cheaply. And this actually creates situations of exploitation of human labor, because these platforms provide labor which is very underpaid. It's usually like a fraction of $1 per hour. And this also is this kind of hybrid situation between the use of algorithms and humans. And I've been inspired by this phenomenon in my work, and projects such as AAI, which stands for Artificial Intelligence, refer to this new labor platform, but also to various kinds of soft exploitations that happen in contemporary societies by the use of our harvesting of our data by corporations, and how we all essentially become workers on a gigantic conveyor belt. And
could you describe that project?
Yes, the AAI consisted in outsourcing my works, my sculptures, to non-human agents, termite colonies. So I've been collaborating with entomologists from University of Florida and Harvard University, thinking about the fact that entomologists identified the fact that termites produce this collective personality. So each colony is intelligent collectively, but it produces individual personality traits. At the same time, termite colonies are very close to human societies, because termites are organized in worker societies that are stratified, and they have classes of workers, farmers, nurses, soldiers, and there is even some kind of equivalent of free time when groups of termites are kind of hanging out and not doing anything for periods of time. And they produce these monumental structures, termite mounds that resemble pyramids or cathedrals. So essentially they are products of work of entire societies. And I got interested in how this model of collective intelligence and distributed cognition or distributed labor can be applied to art production. So what I did is I outsourced my sculptures to various termite colonies, and each colony was isolated and given vividly colored pigmented sands, gold particles, and broken crystals. And they were just building. And so the result is this extremely artificially looking and sparkly forms that each time have a different shape, and they reflect a collective identity or collective personality of a given colony. And actually, entomologists are able to say something looking at the shapes, what this means for a given colony, if it's very dynamic and militant and curious, or if it's very slow and sluggish, and so on. So I'm using these works as thinking both about this hybridization of nature and us inhabiting this space between AI and microbiome studies and genetic engineering, and how
who is us? Just curious.
As humans, we are actually experiencing these different paradigms not separately, but all mixed in and kind of bundled in, and many of them are constantly evolving in front of our eyes. So we're living in pretty terrifying times where this all poses major threats, like what could happen with uncontrolled gene editing, or what could happen with corporations controlling our lives and harvesting data about us, and for example, the project of the citizen score in China, and like how profiles of our data could be used for governance, by police or by like the judicial system, and all this kind of blind alleys that our societies seem to go into. But at the same time, it's an interesting moment of where all these orders are somehow overlapping or being crossed over. So AAI was referring to the notion coined by Jeff Bezos of artificial intelligence that he used to describe this new working class of Amazon Mechanical Turk. And I thought that it's interesting to apply this to art production. And so this series of works that I've been still producing in Florida is also related to my interest in the soft exploitations, how our data is constantly captured by corporations, but we're not directly harmed, but we just participate in this gigantic conveyor belt of dispersed social factory where we are circulating various kinds of memes and images and content that brings profits to corporations. And after realizing this project, I started working on outsourcing my work to also human agents. So thinking about how artistic projects could be outsourced to Amazon Mechanical Turk, I collaborated with the scientists at MIT Center for Computer Science and Artificial Intelligence to divide artworks into this kind of piecemeal work, or to this elements that could be amalgamated together and that could be entirely outsourced to thousands of people. And so projects such as assembly line and production line were created in such a way that first of all, each of the workers of these online platforms was asked to contribute, for example, one single line that they draw with a computer mouse or a selfie. And then in the case of the single lines, they were all aggregated into one continuous line that was later outputted to a robotic arm, but in such a way that the drawings become very painterly, and they don't look like computer printouts. They actually look for kind of very random and like hand drawn. And in the case of assembly line, we aggregated about 15,000 of selfies taken by workers of Amazon Mechanical Turk platform. So what we generated was a collective self-portrait of this working class. But what is specific to these projects is that we also created a system to enable profit sharing from the sales of these works among all the workers, to kind of, in a way, cynically approach the fact that the art market became this kind of pinnacle of stratification of society and of social exploitation, and so this project tries to basically connect the lower rungs of social strata with the beneficiaries of surplus value that art market creates. So whenever each of these works is sold, a large portion of the profits is distributed evenly among all the workers.
We're going to take a short break and come back with part 2 of the conversation.